Hello, you're watching A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanov, and let's see the top stories. UK, Australia and Canada recognize Palestinian state ahead of UN General Assembly. US President Donald Trump warns Afghanistan to give back control of the Bagram air base. And nationwide protests in Canada against Prime Minister Mark Carney's policies. Canada, Australia and the UK have all recognized the Palestinian state. The three G7 countries join a list of 150 countries who recognize a Palestinian state, hoping the decision will revive the hopes for a two-state solution. Israel's foreign ministry has said recognition a reward for Hamas. The announcement has been made just before the start of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly, where Palestinian sovereignty will be in focus. Staying with the United Nations, it marks 80 years of existence, with world leaders gathering in New York for the opening of its annual General Assembly. Nearly 150 heads of state and government personnel are expected to take the stage next week. But the global organization faces some of the gravest global challenges since its creation in 1945.
Every September, the United Nations General Assembly provides a unique platform. One hall where every country, large or small, has a voice. This Tuesday marks the start of the 81st session under the theme Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development and human rights. The UN was founded in the aftermath of the Second World War with just 51 members. Today it counts 193 states, plus observer delegations such as the Holy See, Palestine and the European Union. Its purpose remains rooted in preventing conflict, promoting human rights and fostering international cooperation. By tradition, Brazil is always the first to address the Assembly, followed by the United States as host nation. After that, the order is set by rank and registration. This year, speeches are expected to be dominated by war and humanitarian emergencies. In Gaza, famine warnings have already been issued as the conflict between Israel and Hamas nears its second year. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will speak next week, while Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will only appear by video after being denied a US visa. Ukraine will also be center stage. President Volodymyr Zelensky is scheduled to address the Assembly on Wednesday, with Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov taking the podium on Saturday. Meanwhile, the Security Council will convene a high-level debate on the war. Other key speakers include Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian, who arrives amid urgent talks over Tehran's nuclear program, and Syria's interim President Ahmed al-Sharaa, given a rare UN travel exemption despite his group remaining under sanctions. His appearance will mark Syria's first post-Assad debut after more than a decade of civil war. Alongside conflict diplomacy, the agenda stretches across the world's other challenges. Climate change will again be a rallying call, especially from small island states most threatened by rising seas. But critics say its structures still reflect the world of 1945, not the multipolar reality of today. Proposals under the UN 80 Reform Initiative aim to make the organization more efficient, cut duplication across thousands of mandates, and place staff closer to the communities they serve. At the same time, there is growing debate over who will replace Secretary General Antonio Guterres when his mandate ends in 2026. The choice will again fall to the Security Council's 5 veto powers, raising familiar questions about legitimacy and balance.
Earlier, we spoke with writer and journalist accredited to the United Nations, Ahmed Abdelsamid Siam, about the UN General Assembly's decision to allow Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas to deliver a pre-recorded video during next week's high-level meeting. Siam shared his thoughts on the expectations for what the speech will address.
Mahmoud Abbas, in his speech, normally he talks about the suffering of the Palestinian people for the last 80 years. He will remind the people of the Nakba of 1948 and what happened when the Palestinian majority were expelled of their homes, and the Nakba did not end there, but it continued because the Palestinians still did not see their people in independent state. He reminds the people that 1947 partition plan calls about creating two states, Israel and Palestine. One was implemented like in less than 2 years, and one is still waiting. He will talk, I'm sure, about the genocidal war in Gaza and the atrocities committed against the Palestinians and trying to destroy the livelihood of Gaza and the possibility of having a normal living condition in Gaza. So he will appeal to the world also to end the genocide. That is very important. He will also address the world that the state that the Palestinian is seeking is not a state to carry war with Israel, but to live in peace with Israel. And he, as he said in the past, we will have a state without arms. We don't need an army. He said it repeatedly. We just need a state that we can build our future, and our children will go to school, and we can build our institution, and we can have normal life. People can travel and come back to their state. And he will emphasize that this state includes the West Bank, East Jerusalem as its capital, and Gaza. And he would say there will be no Palestinian state without Gaza, and Gaza is always will remain part of the Palestinian territory.
Iran's nuclear program is back in the spotlight after the UN Security Council failed to extend sanctions relief. Tehran says it will suspend cooperation with the UN's nuclear watchdog, while President Masoud Pezeshkian insists his country cannot be stopped from advancing.
Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has condemned efforts to reimpose United Nations sanctions on his country over its nuclear program. Speaking in Tehran, he said Western powers were trying to block the way to progress.
They sat down and returned this so-called snapback. They are blocking the way. It is the minds and ideas that create ways. We either will find a way or create ways. They cannot stop us. They can hit our Natanz and our Fordo facilities. But it is the people who built these facilities, and they will build more important ones in the future.
His comments come a day after the UN Security Council's rejected a resolution that would have prolonged sanction relief under the 2015 nuclear deal. 9 members voted against, with Russia, China, Pakistan and Algeria backing Iran, and 2 countries abstaining. The European E3, Britain, France and Germany had triggered the so-called snapback mechanism, accusing Iran of failing to comply with its commitments. It means UN sanctions on Iran will be re-established at the end of the month, unless they agree to further extend sanctions relief. In response, Iran announced it would effectively suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. The decision heightens tensions, just as world leaders, including Pezeshkian, head to New York for the UN General Assembly, where intense diplomatic efforts are expected in the coming week.
Climate Week has opened in New York until September 27th, featuring over 1,000 events. UN-led closed-door sessions will bring together leaders from government, business and civil society to drive action on key climate issues, laying the groundwork for COP30 later this year in Brazil.
Climate Week has kicked off in New York, running from 21st to 27th September, featuring its largest program yet with over 1,000 events. This year sees record participation from companies and organizations, despite the United States pursuing a fossil fuel agenda and scaling back climate action. Held alongside the UN General Assembly since 2009, Climate Week brings together businesses, campaigners and philanthropists through presentations, panel discussions and networking events, aiming to drive deals and discussion on tackling the climate crisis. Europe remains divided on climate goals, but is on track to cut emissions by 54% by 2030, with Danish Minister Lars Aagaard saying responsibility must now be shared more widely. The centrepiece of the week is the UN Secretary-General's Special Climate Summit on Wednesday, the 24th of September, at UN headquarters. Leaders from 109 countries are expected to take part ahead of COP30 in Brazil, following last year's COP29 in Baku, where nations from around the world updated their Paris Agreement climate pledges. Closed-door solutions dialogues from 22nd to 24th September will tackle extreme heat, adaptation and finance, industrial decarbonisation, methane reduction, and tropical forest protection, bringing together leaders from government, business, and civil society. The summit will give world leaders a platform to unveil new plans, demonstrate climate commitment, and highlight opportunities in the clean energy transition. UN Chief Antonio Guterres, Brazil's President Lula, and other leaders will address the summit as fast-developing nations such as Brazil and China take on greater leadership ahead of COP30.
A cyber attack on airport check-in and boarding systems, which began on Friday night, continued to disrupt operations at several major European airports through Sunday. Heathrow, Brussels and Berlin were among the worst affected, while Dublin and Cork reported only minor impacts. The attack primarily targeted electronic check-in and baggage drop, forcing airports to switch to manual procedures. 29 departures and arrivals were cancelled across Heathrow, Brussels and Berlin. And Brussels Airport has asked airlines to cancel half of their scheduled departing flights on Sunday to prevent long queues and late cancellations, signaling the disruption will continue through the weekend. The United Nations Security Council will hold an emergency meeting in New York on Monday after Russian fighter jets violated Estonian airspace last week. Estonia says 3 armed MiG-31 jets crossed into its territory for 12 minutes on Friday, calling it a direct breach of the UN Charter and NATO security. It's the first time in Estonia's 34 years of UN membership that a country has requested such a meeting. NATO says the incursion is part of a wider pattern of Russian escalation, pointing to recent drone violations in Polish and Romanian airspace. Earlier, we were joined by political analyst Alexandra Filipenko in Lithuania to discuss NATO's interception of Russian fighter jets that violated Estonian airspace. Filipenko shared her thoughts on the possible next move by US President Donald Trump, who expressed displeasure with Russia over the incident.
If he will be sure, and we've seen the photographs, of course, of Russian aircrafts flying over NATO territory, and of course the Estonian Air Force commander reminded of those previous facts that happened over NATO territory. Definitely, President Trump will be briefed on that, and I'm sure he'll have way more information. And the only way to act, the logical way, would be to pressure Putin, would be to pressure Vladimir Putin, to pressure the Kremlin, although of course they would say that it's not them, they don't know anything about it. But I think it's rather difficult to suppose that those are military aircrafts flying around out of thin air. They came out of thin air, or maybe from another planet. Then we all need the help of Elon Musk or someone from NASA, for example. But being serious, actually, Donald Trump can really get offended, I would say, by that, because if we're talking about NATO alliance, of course, the United States are a leader of this NATO alliance. And if Donald Trump is really offended, he would push Vladimir Putin. But we've seen from President Trump, although Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, has done everything to gain the trust of President Trump, to get to be friendly, more and more friendly with President Trump, although we've heard from President Trump that maybe Europe should defend itself more and play a bigger role in NATO and in general in its own defense. So we might even not see any action from President Trump, although the logical step, of course, would be to pressure Vladimir Putin, and to pressure Vladimir Putin not only regarding European defense and European territory, but also regarding Ukraine.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says this week has advanced Ukraine a step closer to finalizing the European Union's 19 sanctions package against Russia, which he expects to be approved shortly. Zelensky said Ukraine will quickly implement the EU sanctions once confirmed, and called on the United States to follow with strong measures. He welcomed the EU for including many of Ukraine's proposals in the sanctions against Russia. He also received ambassadors from Germany, Norway and the Czech Republic at St. Sophia's Cathedral, emphasizing their firm support for Ukraine's sovereignty.
This week has brought us closer to finalising the 19th sanctions package against Russian aggression. We expect its approval soon. We will quickly synchronise the package in Ukraine. Russia's energy resources are being restricted. As well as the infrastructure of the Shadow Fleet, it will face new pressure. Cryptocurrency schemes used by Russia, specifically to bypass sanctions, will also be countered by Europe. Thank you. I am grateful that many of Ukraine's proposals have been taken into account in the EU sanctions package. We are constantly working on this with every one of our partners, and of course, above all, with the European Union and the Group of Seven. We now expect strong sanction steps from the United States as well. Europe is doing its part.
U.S. President Donald Trump is demanding the Taliban return control of Bagram Air Base to the United States, warning of bad things if Afghanistan refuses. The base, the largest U.S. military facility in the country, was abandoned during the 2021 withdrawal and has long been seen as strategically important. The Taliban, however, have firmly rejected the demand, insisting Afghanistan will not host foreign military forces.
Bagram Air Base, once the main hub for US military operations in Afghanistan. For 2 decades, it hosted American forces and served as the largest US base in the country. About 40 miles north of Kabul, Bagram housed long runways, aircraft hangars, and tens of thousands of troops. American forces abandoned it in 2021, just before the Taliban took back power. Now, Donald Trump says he wants it back. He first brought it up during a trip to the UK after meeting Prime Minister Keir Starmer and has since been repeating it.
Are you asking President to rule out U.S. boots on the ground to get Bagram back?
We won't talk about that, but we're talking now to Afghanistan, and we want it back, and we want it back soon, right away. And if they don't do it, you're going to find out what I'm going to do.
Trump later posted online, if Afghanistan doesn't give Bagram back to those who built it, the United States of America, bad things are going to happen. For Trump, the base isn't just about history, it's about strategy. Bagram sits close to China and Central Asia, and US commanders long saw it as a vital hub. But the Taliban say there is no chance of handing it over. A spokesman called Trump's remarks interference in Afghan affairs. The foreign ministry says it wants ties with Washington, but without any foreign bases on Afghan soil. Posting on X, a foreign ministry official said, Afghanistan and the United States need engagement with one another and can have economic and political relations based on mutual respect and shared interest, without America maintaining any military presence in Afghanistan. A military presence has never been accepted by Afghans throughout history, and this possibility was completely rejected when the Taliban returned to power. However, the doors seem to be open to other forms of engagement.
Thousands rallied across Canada against Prime Minister Mark Carney's policies. Demonstrators demanded urgent climate action, protection of Indigenous and migrant rights, and an end to Canada's military support for Israel.
About 2,000 activists marched through downtown Toronto on Saturday as part of nationwide protests against Prime Minister Mark Carney's agenda. At the centre of criticism was Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy Act, which fast-tracks large infrastructure projects. Environmental and Indigenous groups say it bypasses safeguards in the name of economic growth. Another flashpoint was Bill C-2, expanding border powers and giving authorities greater access to personal data.
We are now at code red on the planet Earth. Humanity is unequivocally facing a climate emergency. And what we're here to say is stop all of the political, the economic stuff, and the legal stuff. We are in an emergency, and we've got to act as it is an emergency.
Protesters also condemned Ottawa's planned public spending cuts alongside billions earmarked for defence and demanded a full arms embargo on Israel.
Right now we're seeing this moment where the federal government is pushing forward anti-people, anti-climate, anti-Indigenous, anti-migrant agendas. Every law that Carney has put into place since now is about enriching the CEOs and hurting a common people. He's arming Israel, he's pushing people against migrants, and we're saying no to that. We are drawing the line.
The protests were organised by a coalition of 14 groups, with marches also held in Ottawa, Montreal and Vancouver. Organisers said the protests aim to unite movements for climate justice, Indigenous rights, migrant justice and peace under a single demand, that Ottawa put people and the planet first.
Thousands of Israelis gathered in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv Saturday, demanding an end to the war in Gaza and the return of Israeli hostages still held in the Gaza Strip. Drone shots from the Tel Aviv showed the scale of the protests, and of thousands of protesters waved flags, carried banners with photographs of hostages and chanted slogans urging a ceasefire. Relatives of hostages criticized the Israeli government, saying its slow response and military attacks are putting those captives in greater danger. Red Bull's Max Verstappen won Azerbaijan Grand Prix, leading every lap. Behind him, George Russell and Carlos Sainz completed the podium after a dramatic race full of twists and setbacks. Let's take a look back at how the action unfolded on the streets of Baku with our correspondent Narchicek Jahangirli.
Red Bull's Max Verstappen took a commanding victory in the final race of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, leading every lap from the start to finish. It was a flawless drive from the Red Bull driver, smooth, consistent and never under threat. That's 2 wins in a row for the reigning world champion, who is now just 69 points behind Oscar Piastri in the title standings. George Russell brought home second place for Mercedes after passing Carlos Sainz when the Williams driver pitted on lap 28. It was a great result for Mercedes, with young teammate Kimi Antonelli finishing fourth, marking a strong weekend for the team. Carlos Sainz still secured third place, giving Williams their first podium since 2021 Belgian Grand Prix. He started second, lost ground, but fought back to finish strong. The drama began immediately as championship leader Oscar Piastri crashed out on the first lap. He locked up and hit the wall on his own, a huge blow to his title hopes. It was another unlucky day for both McLaren drivers. Lando Norris suffered a slow pit stop and lost 3 positions, just like in Monza 2 weeks ago. Luckily, the weather stayed dry despite cloudy skies, but strong winds swept autumn leaves across the track. Drivers had to stay sharp, especially through Baku's narrow and twisty sections. Aside from the contact on lap 17 when Alex Albon touched Franco Colapinto's Alpine, there were no major incidents. Fortunately, both drivers recovered and continued racing. Despite the early chaos, the rest of the race was clean and strategic. Teams and drivers were focused and it showed. A brilliant performance by Verstappen, a key moment in the title race, and a podium shake-up to remember. And that's a wrap from the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. The checkered flag waves on Baku. See you next season.
The third Baku Security Forum is coming to an end after 3 days of high-level discussions on terrorism, armed conflicts and humanitarian crisis. Organized by Azerbaijan State Security Service, the forum gathered intelligence and security chiefs from around the world to coordinate responses to global threats. Armenia was also represented with National Security Service Director Andranik Simonyan leading a delegation to the talks. And earlier we were joined by Richard Giragosyan, director of the Regional Studies Center in Yerevan. He said the Armenian security chief's visit to Baku reflects a positive moment in diplomatic engagement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as Armenia and Turkey. Here is more.
Well, this is very significant, especially following the ceremony at the White House in August, where the Armenian and Azerbaijani leaders were able to achieve a remarkable degree of progress. What this Baku visit for 3 days by the Armenian security chief represents is the latest in a more positive momentum of diplomatic engagement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as Armenia and Turkey. And we do expect this momentum to continue.
Azerbaijan and Rwanda have strengthened their partnership with the signing of key agreements on education, air services, agriculture and public service. The agreements were signed during the Rwandan President Paul Kagame's official visit to Baku, where both leaders discussed expanding cooperation in politics, economy and culture.
Rwanda's President Paul Kagame paid an official visit to Azerbaijan, receiving a full state welcome in Baku, including an honor guard and the national anthems of both countries. President Ilham Aliyev hosted Kagame, holding one-on-one and expanded meetings to discuss broad cooperation in politics, economy, education, energy and culture. During the visit, both countries signed several agreements, including an air services agreement, a cooperation agreement in education, and memoranda of understanding on agriculture, public service delivery, and investment promotion. These agreements were exchanged by respective ministers and officials in a ceremony attended by both presidents. In joint press statements, President Aliyev highlighted the growing political and economic partnership, praising Rwanda's support in international forums such as the Non-Aligned Movement and the UN. President Kagame underscored the similarities between the two countries and expressed Rwanda's commitment to strengthening bilateral ties in politics, trade and investment. The visit marks a new chapter in Azerbaijan-Rwanda relations, creating a platform for deeper political, economic and cultural partnership.
Earlier, we were joined by Tom Mulisa, Executive Director of GLEAD in Kigali, Rwanda, who said the latest meeting builds on a series of past engagements between Azerbaijan and Rwanda, including ministerial talks, presidential meetings at COP29, and earlier agreements dating back to 2004. Let's see more.
Thank you very much. I think the meeting was quite important, and I think it is a continuation of a series of meetings that have taken place before. We've the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan and that one of Rwanda meeting previously. And we've had also the two presidents, I think, meeting during the COP29. So this meeting comes after a series of meetings from 2004, 2017, 2019. I think this is cementing a series of meetings and memorandums that have happened before.
Exports of industrial-type dried tomatoes grown in Elazığ in eastern Turkey are expected to reach around 1,300 tons this year. The juicy red fruit will be exported to European countries such as Germany, Spain and England, and are renowned for their taste and aroma.
This year's crop of tomatoes grown in a city in eastern Turkey is set to yield more than 100,000 tonnes. One portion of the industrial-type fruit flourishing in Elazığ will be sent fresh to source factories, and another will be dried and exported to several countries including Italy, the UK, Germany and France. The Provincial Director of Agriculture and Forestry says the increase of crops means producers can expand their businesses.
As long as fruit and vegetable production in our province continues to grow in this way, related enterprises will develop and expand further. In particular, our farmers will earn more from dried tomatoes, and with large-scale advanced processing systems, production areas will increase rapidly.
Farm workers, mostly women, will harvest the crop, where half of it will be salted and laid out to dry in the sun. Renowned for their taste and aroma, These dried tomatoes are exported in Western Turkey to Europe and beyond, adding flavour to tables worldwide. A local producer says demand for the juicy fruit has increased over the decades.
This year we cultivated tomatoes on 400 to 500 acres of land and produced around 200 tons of dried tomatoes. I employ 120 workers here, and our tomatoes contain no pesticides or additives.
Tomatoes are the leading crop in Elazığ, and rising international demand for them dried, along with support for producers, has led to a steady increase in production. Last year, around 1,000 tonnes was exported, with expectations this year reaching approximately 1,300 tonnes. That's equivalent to drying 20,000 tonnes of fresh tomatoes.
With the support we receive, we plan to expand further. We are considering establishing a sauce factory. Our aim is to grow the business even more and contribute further to our country.
Elazığ's soil, altitude and climate are highly suitable for tomato cultivation. As a result, the soft red fruit is sought after for its quality, both domestically and abroad.
That's all we have for now. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned to A News for more.